the singularity near?
The truth is out there.
The military-industrial complex.
The seven mountains of the influencers of culture.
To be as gods,
Change has come to America.
Catapult of propaganda.
From a secure location on top of the ridge in the heart of the beautiful Missouri Ozarks, this is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
It's 7 o'clock and the coyotes are howling, or maybe that's the wind. I'm not sure. Either way, it means it's time for A View from the Bunker. We are live, back again. Tonight, President Trump calls off the Iran strike and the ICE raids. Facebook wants to become the mark of the beast. The 2020 presidential campaign is in full swing, and Democrats want reparations for everything. California lawmakers try again to outlaw the Bible. The Arch of Palmyra continues its world tour, and we talk about the passing of a friend. Our guest tonight in the interview segment, biblical giantology on the table. We talk with Dr. Judd Burton, our friendly neighborhood PhD. All that and more over the next 2 hours. This is A View from the Bunker Live. I'm Derek Gilbert. It's June 23rd, 2019, and we are back from our world tour. So our sequence of best of shows and archive programs is run its course for now, but they will be back soon because we've got a busy schedule coming up. We'll tell you more about that towards the end of the program tonight as we are approaching the conference season around the country. And Sharon and I are blessed, honored to be invited to speak at a number of places. So we'll tell you about that before the end of the program tonight. We thank you for listening, whether it's at Spreaker.com, iHeartRadio, Stitcher.com, Spotify.com. We got places all over the globe where you can listen. And, of course, all of those are linked at vftb.net, which is the global hub of the broadcast here. You can subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify. If you prefer to listen in time delay, that's perfectly fine. And again, we got links to where you can subscribe to all of those podcasts with your favorite pod catcher, wherever fine podcasts are sold. The links at vftb.net. Now, the easiest way, of course, to keep up with what we do on this program is just subscribe or download our free mobile app. The mobile app is available from the iTunes App Store or from Google Play's store. And we've got links to those, of course, at, you guessed it, vftb.net. We also send the audio to youtube.com, my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Derek Gilbert. That's D-E-R-E-K. Got an email today, somebody asking why we post videos there with only audio instead of just video. And that's a really good question. It's a very simple answer. Slow bandwidth. Slow internet here out in the country. That, and I'm kind of a perfectionist when it comes to the video thing, and I don't have time to do the post-production. But that's not to say we'll never do it. It's just, for now, streaming it live to the web via YouTube, which would be the easy thing to do, is just really not feasible given our current internet connection. So anyway, we thank you all who are logging in on the chat room, by the way. It's Spreaker.com, Spreaker.com/show/VFTB. Glad to be back live with you. And we got, well, hello, Edmund from Malaysia checking in. So people all across the world. When I say that, I'm not really exaggerating. So we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule and making an appointment to be here. You catch up with us on social media. I tweet at View from Bunker, or at Derek Gilbert. That's probably the more active one. We're on Facebook, the Facebook page for this program, View from the Bunker. And we do post at oneway.com. The page there is at Derek P. Gilbert. Derek P. Gilbert. Before we get into the news of the week, first, we're going to talk about a friend who passed away suddenly and unexpectedly this past week. And that was the award-winning filmmaker Richard Shaw. Award-winning director of films like Beat the Drum. He also produced the film on the Torah Codes with experts, generally Orthodox rabbis or Israeli mathematicians, who dug into the first 5 books of the Bible in Hebrew and found some really startling things there. So the Torah Codes, the film Gaza. He also probably best known for his work on the Watchers series of DVDs with L.A. Marzulli. So anyway, on Wednesday afternoon, he was admitted to the hospital. He and his wife rushed him to the hospital's emergency room with chest pains. Doctors determined that open-heart surgery was necessary. And within 4 hours of being admitted to the hospital, he was dead. He was gone. He'd dealt with a heart condition all of his life, and God granted him 65 years to serve him, and Richard Shaw certainly made an impact on the Christian community around the world, showing that there is more out there in the way of evidence for the narrative, the story, the history of the Bible than most of us ever will. And he did it with production values that really raised the bar for any Christian production that wants to do the kind of work that we do, that L.A. Marzulli does, that the crew at True Legends do, Gen 6 Productions, Timothy Alberino, Steve Quayle. Richard Shaw was an expert in video production, and he worked to set up the infrastructure for several major Christian ministries. So we will miss him. He had a gentle heart, a wonderful sense of humor, and was able to win the trust of people who normally don't trust easily. And I'm thinking specifically of the Orthodox rabbi community. Rabbi Matatayu Glazerson, who's considered an expert in Torah codes by those who follow those. He, about 3 years ago, managed to arrange for me at SkyWatchTV an interview with Matatayu Glazerson. Rabbi Glazerson had never done an interview with any Christian program before, and yet he granted us an interview. And there are with 2,000 years of bad blood between the rabbinic community and Christianity, it's not difficult to understand why it's hard to get an interview, to talk with and gain the trust of Orthodox and Haredi rabbis. But Richard managed to do it and brought some just incredible information to the world through his Torah Codes DVD. So Richard Shaw passed away this past Wednesday at the age of 65, and we will miss him. L.A. Marzulli, in fact, has set up a GoFundMe page to help Richard's widow Mary with their expenses. And if you feel led to contribute, there will be a link in the show notes, both at vftb.net and at Spreaker.com, at YouTube.com. Wherever you're finding this podcast, you'll find the notes and the link to the GoFundMe page. Trying to raise $65,000 to benefit Mary. Sadly, Richard did not have life insurance, so anything that you can contribute would be a great help. So, on to the news of the week. Plenty to talk about this week. The difficult part is really trying to weed things down to just the important stuff. And I guess the close call with going to war with Iran is probably top of the list. According to news reports, which you probably heard, President Trump called off a military strike against Iran about 10 minutes before launch. Now, the original report from the New York Times said that the planes were already in the air, and that Trump called them back after the planes had already taken off and were on the way, just minutes away from making the strike. And that, according to the president, is not exactly correct. Now, the reason for the retaliation was the Iranians shooting down an unmanned drone, a U.S. Navy drone, a surveillance drone. $230 million airplane, but not manned. So there were no lives lost on the side of our military. Now, there's conflicting accounts. Of course, the Iranians say that it strayed into Iranian airspace, whereas the Pentagon says, no, it was over international waters. That makes a difference. And also, you can understand why the military would want to keep an eye on what was happening in the Strait of Hormuz. About 30% of the world's oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. But there's some question as to what has transpired. War is as much a battle of information as it is tactics involving, what's the word they use, kinetic assets, planes and ships and real live human beings. According to the president, and I am quoting now from his tweets, which is how he bypasses the media and tells us what he wants to think without the media editing his comments. We were cocked and loaded to retaliate last night on 3 different sites, probably missile sites. When I asked how many will die, and a general told him 150 people, sir, was the answer. 10 minutes before the strike, I stopped it, not proportionate to shooting down an unmanned drone. I am in no hurry. Our military is rebuilt, new, and ready to go, by far the best in the world. Sanctions are biting, and more added last night. Iran can never have nuclear weapons, not against the USA and not against the world, end quote. Now, the question is, was the shooting down of the American drone ordered by Iran's military command, or was there somebody on the ground who got nervous when the drone approached Iranian airspace? There's some evidence that that might be the case. And when the president was advised of that, maybe that's when he backed down and called off the strike. We don't know. I mean, we only know what we're told. I don't have secret sources inside the Situation Room. All we can do is try to read between the lines and figure out what's going on here. The president has also made a couple of comments over the weekend, similar to what he's been saying about North Korea, that if the Ayatollahs would be willing to sit down and talk and we could reach some sort of mutual accommodation, that it would be to Iran's benefit. Don't know if they will listen, because for the Ayatollahs, this is a religious thing as much as just secular, more so than secular geopolitics. So will they listen to that kind of reason? Don't know. They don't do business like American businessmen do business. Now, Iranian leaders said that we shot down the drone, but we could have shot down a U.S. aircraft that was in the vicinity with 35 people on board. So hopefully, cooler heads on both sides will prevail. We have speaking of myself in the third person, I talked with the Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis earlier last week about what was going on, and he really says, he really hopes that cooler heads will prevail on both sides, because although our military is the strongest in the world, Iran isn't going to be stupid enough to go toe-to-toe in a slugfest, in a traditional military showdown. In other words, they know that militarily, in terms of what they've got to throw at us in a conventional war fought along the lines of, say, World War II, it would be no contest. It would be a slaughter. But they don't need to fight that way. They don't need to fight that way. Fourth-generation warfare, asymmetric warfare, terror strikes behind enemy lines, terror strikes against allies who don't have the military capability to respond as the United States does. There are a lot of ways that Iran could make things very bloody, even as their country was being destroyed. And so neither side really benefits from this. Pat Buchanan wrote a piece this past week that I thought was insightful. The older I get, the more I realize Pat Buchanan is a really smart guy. Remember when he ran for president in 92? And I watched his speech at the 92 Republican convention. And he scared me. I thought, this guy's a brown shirt. And he's not, really. And he doesn't see any real national interest for the United States to go to war with Iran. The only interest we have in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf is oil. And frankly, because of fracking here in the United States, we don't need Middle Eastern oil anymore. As you might have heard, within the last few months, the United States has become the world's leading exporter of oil. More than Russia, more than Saudi Arabia, the United States. We don't need Middle Eastern oil. Now, we don't want to see the world economy collapse if that 30% of the world's oil that sails through the Strait of Hormuz is suddenly, shut off. But we would get by. So hopefully we pray that cooler heads will prevail. Now, that's not to say that the president backed down from responding at all. He did order a cyber attack against an Iranian intelligence unit that the Pentagon believes was part of the mine incidents that targeted a couple of oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman. And by the way, why would they mine the Gulf of Oman instead of the Strait of Hormuz? If the idea, I'm just asking the question, tactically speaking, I just don't know why they would do it in the Gulf of Oman. If the idea is to shut down the Strait of Hormuz to oil traffic, why not put the mines in the Strait instead of out in the Gulf of Oman? Anyway, Yahoo News broke the story Saturday night, confirmed later by CNN and the Washington Post. This digital strike was launched Thursday night, as we were kind of watching for actual, fireworks, explosions in Tehran. The spy group that supported the mine attacks apparently was hit with a cyber attack by U.S. Cyber Command. And so the message was sent that way. Do Americans support military action against Iran? That's a question that has different answers depending on who you ask. Most seem to think that most of us don't. But when you phrase the question differently, do we support military action against Iran? Well, then about half of Americans actually do. Obviously, more Republicans do than Democrats. That's not a surprise. But if military action is defined as actually putting boots on the ground in Iran or beginning, launching attacks across the border from our bases in Iraq, I think that Americans, the majority of Americans, would get tired of that very, very quickly. So, this is A View from the Bunker. It is June 23rd. This day, we were supposed to see a number of raids by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. You might remember earlier in the week, a story was leaked to the press that the president had promised to deport thousands of people in the country illegally. And now it's coming to light that apparently the media found out about the raids and the locations of the raids because it was leaked to them by the acting Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Kevin McAleenan. Wait, what? Yeah, apparently the DHS secretary, the acting DHS secretary, leaked the information to the press to sabotage the raids before they were carried out. This is according to 5 people, current and former administration officials, reported by multiple sources, and one that I trust, the Washington Examiner, which is a source that leans conservative, and they seem pretty responsible about their journalism, unlike CNN, New York Times, and Washington Post. So yesterday, President Trump announced that the nationwide operation would be postponed for at least 2 weeks. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi immediately trying to take credit for it. But apparently the officials that spoke to the Washington Examiner said, no, that wasn't it. It was because the information had been leaked to the press by Kevin McAleenan, which gave the people who might be deported kind of a heads up so they could, move, hide, which would make the ICE raids kind of pointless. Not to mention the fact that there are some municipal governments out there, like the city of Chicago, my hometown, the town of my birth, where new mayor Lori Lightfoot said that they would actively take steps to block ICE agents trying to go about their business. In fact, they've excluded ICE now. They've denied ICE's access to the databases of the Chicago Police Department to make it more difficult for ICE to find people in Chicago illegally. So, this is a huge story. The acting chief of the Department of Homeland Security apparently is a never-Trumper. And so he sabotaged what would have been an operation to round up people in the country against our laws. I won't go so far as to say this is treason, but I would certainly say that if this story is true, and again, I trust the Washington Examiner, Secretary McAleenan should be out of a job by noon Monday, latest. Facebook taking its next step towards global domination. I said in the tease in the intro that it wants to become the mark of the beast. Actually, what they're trying to do is create a global currency. They announced this past week that they want to launch a digital currency, something like Bitcoin, in 2020. Now, this is a big deal. They said that it would be backed by the world's best assets, which means fiat currency, I believe. So you've got a digital currency that's backed by fiat currency, which is essentially just backed by the full faith and credit of whatever government issued the fiat currency. Setting that aside, why is this something that we should pay attention to? Well, Bitcoin, even though it's been around for a while, most of us have heard of Bitcoin. Very few of us actually use Bitcoin, and even fewer of us use Bitcoin to buy things. Bitcoin is far and away the best known of the cryptocurrencies. And yet, for the first 4 months of this year, only about 1.5% of its transactions were with merchants. The other 98.5% of Bitcoin transactions were with other Bitcoin users who then had to convert it into a currency that they could use to buy something from a store or Amazon or whatever. Now, Facebook has an advantage that Bitcoin does not. And that advantage is the billions of users who've made Facebook a part of their daily lives. And I am one, because that's where people are. And so if we want to tell them what we're doing as far as the ministry goes, we have to use Facebook to reach people. So if Facebook can train people to use the digital currency to do things like buy upgrades for any one of the games that they promote, like Farmville or Klondike or whatever's hot right now, they can train people pretty quickly. Hey, this is just like using a debit card, except easier. So Facebook then, with its user base of billions of people, has just an incredible head start over any other cryptocurrency that wants to get into the marketplace. It's got global reach, and it could very easily become a one world currency. Now, the other aspect of this is really disturbing is they're hoping, by the way, that when they launch this, that we will forget all about all of the news items over the last year or two of how badly they've abused the data that they promised to protect. Personal information of ours that they have shared with advertisers like Amazon and Microsoft and Netflix. Stuff that they said that they would not share. Stuff that they shared without our knowledge or consent. And now they want to handle all of our finances as well? The other aspect that's really disturbing is this. You also have heard, I'm sure, that Facebook skews towards Silicon Valley values, which is a really twisted perception of the world and reality. In other words, they're flaming progressives, and they have no problem deplatforming people with a conservative and conservative Christian worldview. Do we really want to give them control over how we buy or sell by buying into this global currency? To be blunt, the answer to that question is no, hell no. This could be a really bad thing. By the way, this situation is so important that this actually is an issue on which I agree with Maxine Waters. She's the chair of the House Financial Services Committee, and she said to Facebook, cease and desist. Stop development of this currency, this cryptocurrency, until regulators and Congress have an opportunity to examine it and take some action. Now, she's not exactly known for her cutting-edge financial smarts, but on this case, and I thought I would never say this, I agree with Maxine Waters. So, we are getting into the 2020, well, we're smack in the middle, the 2020 presidential campaign season. The Democrats are running about 87 different candidates. They just put out a list of who qualified for the first round of debates. Democratic National Committee is trying to weed things out because they don't want a diluted field. Until they come up with a candidate, President Trump doesn't have anybody really challenging him because you've got too many voices shouting for the attention of Democratic voters. But it does seem that one issue that the Democratic candidates are rallying around is reparations. The idea that the United States owes reparations to the descendants of slaves. Now, I know that this is a racially charged issue, and I don't really want to go down that road. I've talked before about the highly improbable, how improbable it is that we would ever be able to figure out how to find out who actually is supposed to get what. Because some of us, like me, I've got some ancestors who arrived in the country early enough that they were slave owners. But half my family arrived here in 1894. My mother's side didn't get here until the 1890s. And some of my father's side of the family got here after slavery was no longer legal. So how do we determine what somebody like me should pay? Setting all of that aside, it appears now that Elizabeth Warren, in trying to set herself apart from the pack, is floating another idea, which is that we should give reparations to LGBTQ plus couples who can now get married, who couldn't get married before the Texas decision, Supreme Court decision, Texas versus, and I can't remember the name of the case, a few years ago, where the Supreme Court found somewhere in invisible ink in the Constitution a right for same-sex couples to call themselves married. Because there are differences when you file your income taxes as to how you're classified. Married couples, and I shouldn't have to define for you, married means one man and one woman, are taxed differently than individuals. So two individuals sharing the same household pay more in taxes than a married couple. So Senator Warren wants to give LGBTQ plus couples, apparently, reparations. This is obviously red meat for social justice warriors and for people who think that socialism is a great deal. Just keep an eye on this trend because this is only going to get worse. I suspect it'll be another week, maybe, before one of the other candidates floats an idea for another form of reparations. But the Democratic Party, in so doing, is setting itself up as diametrically opposed to the vast majority of Americans. And so be it. If that's what they think a winning hand looks like, then I say straight on and full speed ahead. And it'll be a Trump slide in 2020. So, by the way, my former home state, my home states where I was born and raised, of Illinois, which is near bankrupt. I mean, to the point where they're having trouble paying contractors to do basic things like fix roads, is going to start spending money, Medicaid money, covering sex reassignment surgeries. I mean, I've talked enough about that issue not to go into the underlying psychological causes for gender dysphoria, but I think just from a practical standpoint, the state of Illinois has higher priorities right now than whether or not people who think they're the wrong gender can get the state to pay for it. Just saying. California trying once again to force pastors to embrace the pro-LGBT ideology. California Assemblyman Evan Lowe, who's making kind of a career of floating laws like this, put out a proposed bill, ACR 99, that would call on counselors, pastors, religious workers, educators, and institutions with, quote, great moral influence, end quote, to stop teaching that something is wrong with having a same-sex attraction or, gender dysphoria. So, if you basically teach out of the Bible that this kind of physical relationship with a member of the same sex is considered a sin, you could find yourself on the wrong side of the law in California should this bill go through. And finally, one final note, just keep an eye on this because this thing keeps popping up all over the place. The Palmyra Arch, sometimes called the Arch of Baal, which isn't correct. It's the Triumphal Arch of Palmyra, which was a city that was in ancient Syria, a stop on the caravan trail between the ancient city of Mari, which is on the Euphrates River, and Damascus, which is 40 miles from Mount Hermon. Palmyra had a number of temples devoted to pagan gods, as you would back in the first millennium BC. This is a 20-foot tall replica of the Victory Arch of Palmyra that has been on a slow-moving world tour. It was in New York for a bit. It was in London's Trafalgar Square for a bit. Was was in Florence, Italy for a while, and now it is in Bern, Switzerland. Bern, Switzerland. It arrived there about 10 days ago for the 70th anniversary of the Swiss Commission for the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO. It is more commonly known. Date seems a little random. 10 days ago was the 13th of June, 6/13, but it will be there a few more days, which means it arrived just in time for the summer solstice, June 21st, which is a major day in the calendar of pagan worship and many of the megalithic structures around the world, which are constructed specifically to allow the sun to shine in at noontime or at dawn of that particular day, including one that Sharon and I were honored to visit during our tour of Israel, Gilgal Rephaim. There's a hole in that center dome, the tumulus at the center of Gilgal Rephaim, that allows the sun to shine straight in one day a year, and it would be June 21st. So being at Bern, Switzerland, brings the Palmyra Arch, which you had to pass through to go to the temple of Bel, B-E-L, which is the Mesopotamian version of the word Baal, means Lord, representing the god Marduk. Brings it within 100 miles of CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, which, if you've paid attention to the work of Tom Horn and Josh Peck over the last few years, would kind of make the hair stand up on the back of your neck just a little bit. Bern is an appropriate place for the arch because those who find it necessary to bring this around the world and see it as something more than just a cultural landmark will indeed burn someday. Just remember, greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world, so no need to be afraid. Speaking of things biblical and megalithic, we're going to talk giants in the Bible and other cool stuff with our friendly neighborhood PhD. Dr. Judd Burton joins us straight ahead as A View from the Bunker continues.
Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourself for the most unique special offer in SkyWatchTV history. We proudly announce the Vault Declassified Special Collection. For your $35 donation during this very limited time offer, you'll receive the new book by Pentagon analyst Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis, Progressive Evil: How Radicals Are Redefining America's Rights, Making Her Globally Irrelevant for the End Times. Derek P. Gilbert's astonishing new book, Bad Moon Rising: Islam, Armageddon, and the Most Diabolical Double Cross in History. And the groundbreaking new book from Carl Gallup's Gods of the Final Kingdom, unveiling the secrets of the raging celestial war. And now, in a SkyWatch TV first, directly from Tom Horn's personal private vault, you'll receive completely free of charge the never-before-released Tom Horn Secret Files USB flash drive. This drive is not available anywhere else and comes completely loaded with hundreds of files, including the world exclusive, behind-the-scenes, off-the-record video interview regarding perhaps the biggest scandal and cover-up in U.S. history. So hot, we're unable to discuss the specific contents on network television. This 2-hour investigative interview has not been released anywhere else and provides new forensic information connected to the Robert Mueller report that may soon send shockwaves through Washington, D.C. and around the world. The Tom Horn Secret Files USB flash drive also includes the Defender Films full-length, 2-time Telly Award-winning documentary movie Inhuman, the much-sought-after Defender Red Letter Edition Bible with expanded Apocrypha on Kindle and digital files, Eastward Bible software, brand new video presentations from the Watchman Conference, a massive data library of ebooks with tens of thousands of pages and hours of bonus interviews on video with leading prophecy experts. The Tom Horn Secret Files USB flash drive is valued at over $500. Yours now absolutely free when you order the Vault Declassified Special Collection from SkyWatch TV. But we're still not done. SkyWatch TV's Off the Record series is back by popular demand with the Gods of War edition on DVD, featuring exclusive interviews with Pastor Carl Gallups, senior Pentagon analyst Robert McGinnis, and Derek and Sharon Gilbert on the coming hyper battle between the forces of God and the titans of biblical prophecy. This unprecedented collection, sold separately, holds a retail value of over $600. Yours now for only $35 plus shipping and handling. Don't miss this once-in-a-lifetime SkyWatch TV exclusive offer that's too hot for network television. The Vault Declassified Special Collection. Available now at skywatchtvstore.com. Order online or call 1-844-750-4985.
A mysterious altar discovered by accident at a royal park in Edinburgh, Scotland, buried under a triangle of turf. We'll talk about that in our final segment tonight, about 1 hour from now. But now, we're honored to bring in a gentleman who has really helped open my eyes to the significance and importance of the worship of, in the ancient world of the Nephilim, the Rephaim. His archaeological research at Panias, which is at the foot of Mount Hermon, just one aspect of his work. He's an historian and author whose best-known book, probably Interview with the Giant, Ethnohistorical Notes on the Nephilim, and he's also the organizer of the upcoming Sons of God Giants of Old Conference, August 16th and 17th in Lubbock, Texas. It is our honor to welcome back to the program our friendly neighborhood PhD, Dr. Judd Burton.
Great to be back, Derek. Thank you.
Well, appreciate you checking in with us while on the road tonight, and looking forward to getting to Lubbock. Let's talk that up right up front here. This year's conference with Dr. Michael Heiser as a, I don't know if you would call him a headliner, but certainly someone of his academic stature. That's a real coup for the conference.
Absolutely. I think everybody that's going to be speaking, brings gravitas to this conference. It's been my goal since the beginning with the Sons of God conference to bring in solid researchers, that had not necessarily academic backgrounds, but just had solid research backgrounds and had demonstrated that with their work. And it just last year was our biggest year, not only in terms of turnout, but also in terms of, I think, our speakership. And it's, God's just doing an amazing thing with it, and it just gets bigger and better every year. And I hope everyone who can make it can come out.
In addition to Dr. Heiser, Dr. Aaron Judkins, we'll talk a little bit about how you guys are working on some stuff in just a minute here. Pastor Doug Hamp coming down from Colorado, Dr. Gregory Reed, Joe Taylor, Dr. Who am I missing? I'm sure I'm missing someone in there. Oh, yeah, me and Sharon.
You and Sharon, that's right.
And all of this for just a $5 admission at the door. I mean, that's the cost of an airport soda.
Sure. Well, I think that all of us would agree we're not there to make a buck, and we wanted to keep the price, reasonable. So that we realize that, if people are going to come from farther away, that their expenses are going to be on travel and lodging, and meals, and that sort of thing. It's a great deal. I don't say that as a mark of pride necessarily, but it's a fantastic deal. I mean, look at the people that are on the roster. Absolutely. I mean, even if I were not hosting this conference, I would go to this conference, of course. And again, we hope that everybody that can come out will come out, because you're going to be getting some really, really fantastic teaching and research on these topics and related subjects.
Yeah, that's kind of how we feel about it, too. So honored to be a part of it and looking forward to seeing you again. So the new projects that you're working on, let's talk about this. First of all, you had been working in academia, and I guess you'd still technically qualify as an academic, but you've kind of shifted your role inside academia.
I have. I'm no longer teaching, as it were, in an academic post. I resigned my position at South Texas College and have decided to devote full-time to the Institute of Biblical Anthropology and Burton Beyond. I've just been feeling God calling me in that direction for a number of years, and I'm in a place where I can do that. I've had some land that's been made available to me, about 5 acres, to begin the initial stages of a brick and mortar operation. And I'm so sanguine about this decision, and I feel really reinvigorated and energized. You know, I've had so many projects that I've wanted to deal with and get to, and I've really only been able to pick at because my teaching schedule has been so heavy, and both during the academic year and the summers. So I'm really excited about what's on the horizon, and being able to devote all my time and energy and training to the Institute of Biblical Anthropology and all of the prospective projects, be they books or seminars or the online classes that I continue to teach, and conceivably expeditions.
Okay.
Parts disparate. So, I'm not hanging up my trowel by any means. If anything, I'm sharpening my trowel or getting ready to go dig again.
So the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, we've talked about that before in some past programs. For people who may be new to this program, what is the Institute? And I'll put a link in the show notes. It's tioba.org, tioba.org. What is the Institute of Biblical Anthropology?
Well, the Institute of Biblical Anthropology is an independent research institute. It offers classes on the historical and cultural context of the Bible, and also courses on topics that might be considered on the periphery of orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is probably not the right word, but certainly dealing with supernatural realities. There are courses on demonology and the giants and the pre-flood world and that sort of thing. I've described it in the past as sort of like Sunday school meets the X-Files. Probably a good way to describe it. But there will also be I'm trying to build a first-rate research library as well, to which I've been collecting books and sources and things like that for a number of years, actually. And it'll be multifaceted. Eventually I would like to have a gallery, and it'll be a place where field operations can be launched from as well. Be they, ostensibly, those will be in Israel and Holy Land, but also, whatever sites that we deem relevant to the research agenda at the Institute, then we'll pursue those as well.
So how do you...
It's meant to be an institute that's not simply academic in function, but is also available to lay scholars and ministers and anybody who would avail themselves of this particular perspective on the Bible.
So how do you define biblical anthropology, and why would it matter to a Christian?
Well, for many of the reasons that I've just outlined, anthropology is a broad study of the human condition along cultural, linguistic, biological, and archaeological axes. Those applied to the Bible, of course, give you perspective on the cultures and ethnicities of the Bible in the historical and linguistic context. I think, it's critical to a better understanding of the Bible. The more you know about its cultural and historical and linguistic context, the more you're going to be able to glean out of culture. Doug, you mentioned Pastor Doug Halen. We were talking last week, and somebody had buzzed in a question on his show asking if, why didn't Jesus talk about the giants? Or did Jesus talk about giants or something like that? Well, he didn't necessarily address them directly, but he certainly addressed their world. Of course, the passage about the days of Noah and he really didn't have to say anything when he went to Caesarea Philippi because of the Panes, the context in which he was in. Jesus didn't say a lot of things, but he implied a lot that his audiences would have understood that we may not. For instance, when Jesus says, it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, the lion's share of his audience would have understood the allusion that he was making was to the camel gate in Jerusalem.
Ah, okay.
We don't necessarily, that doesn't jump off the page at us, but Jesus didn't, he didn't say, wink, wink, and footnote to you guys 2,000 years later, that's what I'm talking about, is the camel gate. Cultural context is a lot. I mean, it adds so much, that we, even with a good, smooth translation of passages, we may not pick up on immediately.
So
and biblical literacy, just in general, is another concern of mine. I want people. My hope is for as many people as possible, to fall in love with the drama of the Bible. So
in other words,
go ahead.
In other words, just put it in plain and simple terms, we understand the Bible a lot better if we can understand the worldview of the people who were there when it was written, the apostles and the prophets.
Very much so. Yes, of course. That can be said with almost with any text. But the more you understand. See, I'm really, and this is something that you and I have talked about, I think, over the years. I'm taking a cue from a lot of the classicists, back in the early part of the 20th century, who were kind of taking a page from the anthropologist playbook. People like Moses Finley that wrote about, he wrote a book called The World of Odysseus, in which he examined the Odyssey and the Iliad as if they were, notes taken by an anthropologist, and what he was able to glean from them in terms of imagery and culture and economy was that the palette that Homer was using was not Mycenaean Greece, but was in fact, the later Dark Age period, in the early Archaic period that Homer was living in. And so, and the same goes for classicists like, Ward Fowler, who really brought indigenous Roman religion into perspective. That it wasn't, initially their gods were, the Numina, as they were collectively called, were, there were more these spirits that were bereft of personality. They were these raw forces of nature, it was only after their contact with the Greeks that the more anthropomorphic features, began to the Romans began to borrow, and so in a similar manner, with particularly with the issue, the problem, the question of giants, I began to look at the Bible in a similar way, at least from the scholarly perspective. And so it beyond just the question of the giants, it began to inform, my appreciation for the cultural context, the historical context of the Bible. But yeah, I'm certainly not the first to do that with text, but I think it's an important approach. If you're going to be a serious student of the Bible, I think it's an important tool to have in your toolkit.
I'm talking with Dr. Judd Burton on A View from the Bunker. His website is burtonbeyond.com, and you'll find information on the upcoming Sons of God, Giants of Old 7 conference coming up August 16th and 17th. You did your dissertation on Panias, or the Grotto of Pan, which is at the foot of Mount Hermon, another place that we visited on our tour of Israel this year and last year, and being able to explain to people who followed us to Israel what I heard you explain in an interview probably almost 10 years ago now, that was the site of Caesarea Philippi, where Jesus asked Peter that important question, who do you say that I am? Because the answer was really important, and the fact that the question was asked right there, geographically speaking and spiritually speaking, was really important. What was it about Panias that attracted you and led you to write your doctoral dissertation on that site?
Well, I knew about Caesarea Philippi, of course, from I was raised around the Bible, so I knew about the episodes in the New Testament and Mark and Matthew that detailed Jesus' journey there. But as it happened, I was finishing up my bachelor's degree at Hardin-Simmons University, and a dear mentor of mine had suggested that I sign up for the university's expedition. There was a consortium of universities working with the Antiquities Authority on the side of Bonias, and he had been such a huge influence on me. I'd known him for, by that time I had known him for over 10 years. He was the brother-in-law of the pastor in the church that I grew up in, and so I had, even before I knew who Indiana Jones was, I knew who Dr. George Knight was.
Wow!
And he had sort of initiated me into the world of antiquities and archaeology, and just was really patient with me, answering every question, that a little guy had about archaeology and history. And anyway, I later studied Greek with him, and he thought it would be a good idea for me to go, and so I did. And I didn't sign up to go on a pilgrimage. I was just, I had my William Deaver manual of field archaeology, and I was just there to learn the nuts and bolts of field archaeology and learn about the area. And as the time came for us to depart, as the time approached, I was able to, I got everything I could, in terms of the history of the site that was out there. And it began to dawn on me the proximity of the site to Mount Hermon, and I, one cross-reference would lead to another, and I ended up reading about the Watchers and the Giants and the accounts of the apocryphal texts, and wow, this is really interesting. So I got there and worked that season. Worked for 6 weeks and worked on a late Roman era bathhouse that actually used to be part of Herod Agrippa II's palace. They're kind of across the road from where the grotto is at, the cave. But I became very familiar with the layout and the history. Long story short, the trip did end up being a sort of pilgrimage in terms of the places that we visited and whatnot. It was a real eye-opening experience. And it set me on the track towards writing a religious history of the site. There have been many archaeological reports and theological treatises that had been written in conjunction with the site, but I noticed that there was not really a cohesive history that dealt with the sacred geography and the procession of deities and things of that nature at the site. And eventually that set me on the course of, I sort of put the idea on a back burner when I entered my master's program in anthropology. And then when I started my PhD work, I brought the idea as a proposal to my chair and the committee, and they approved it. And of course, not only did I write a religious history of Banyas basically from prehistory to the 17th century AD, but Interview with the Giant was essentially a collection of precipitates from the work that I was doing, because I kept developing questions that I couldn't leave, but I also couldn't directly work into the narrative of my dissertation. And so Interview with the Giant was a byproduct of my dissertation project. And so my work was and continues to be connected with that region of Israel and its history and its future history too, to a great degree.
Yeah, it's a compelling location, and when you realize the history of it, spiritually speaking, and the location there, getting that information in your mind when you read that section of Scripture where Jesus is asking Peter, "Who do people say that I am?" Now, who do you say that I am? And then reading that just a few days later, they climbed a high mountain, which had to be Mount Hermon because it's the only very high mountain in the vicinity, to then essentially declare to the spirit realm, "Here I am. What are you going to do about it?" Because it was after that he made his way to Jerusalem to complete his mission, which, as the Apostle Paul wrote, if the rulers of the age, if the archons, he was talking spirit beings, supernatural entities, not the political rulers of Jerusalem or Rome, if they'd understood what was going on, they would not have crucified him. And so that really helps make it more clear that what was going on was a spiritual encounter, a conflict in the heavenly realm. And that made the visit there this year and last year much more fascinating. And Dr. Judd Burton's work, his doctoral dissertation on that particular location. That's why Jesus picked Caesarea Philippi, the Grotto of Pan, to ask that question, because it was at the base of a mountain that was the Mount of Assembly for the creator god of the Canaanites, had been for thousands of years, at least since the time of Abraham, if not sooner. And the Grotto of Pan, a particular site of cult worship, again, for thousands of years. God, Jesus, nothing by chance. That was planned. That was deliberate. Our conversation with Dr. Burton continues. We'll talk about why it matters whether we believe what the Bible says about the Nephilim, and more as we continue our discussion on A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert.
Jack the Ripper's dark deeds actually began before 1888. And it wasn't a mere man who committed the crimes, but a demon in league with devilish men, a group of men called Red Wing. Only one small group of valiant men and women stand against this evil, a group that place their faith in Christ alone, and they protect a secret of blood that Red Wing hopes to use to usher in the reign of Antichrist and the end of day.
Red Wing is called Red Wing because they want to kill the church. They want to forever stop Christ from coming back. So it's the Holy Spirit, the dove, with a murdered, has been slain, a wounded dove. Ultimately, we still have to remember that the one who is in control is God Almighty, and we have to go to Him, and we have to suit up every time we go out.
The Red Wing Saga by Sharon Gilbert.
Book 1.
Blood Lies.
Book 2.
Blood Rights.
Book 3.
The Blood is the Life.
Book 4.
Realms of Stone.
And now available Book 5.
Realms of Fire. Available at SkyWatchTVstore.com. Paperback and Kindle at Amazon.com. Characters you'll love and a story you can't put down. The Red Wing Saga by Sharon Gilbert. Driving the internet to think, that is our calling. And this is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Next week we talk with a true American hero, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Marvin, Green Beret deployed to Cambodia during the Vietnam War. He's the author of a book called Expendable Elite. This will be an archive broadcast as we head into the 4th of July week. Don't miss it next Sunday night, June 30th. Here at vftb.net, A View from the Bunker. Our guest this week, an archaeologist, I guess a hero in a different way, in that he is bringing to light the rocks that cry out, an historian who's chronicling the events that have given us the Bible that we know today as one of his projects. Author of numerous books, probably best known, the Interview with the Giant. Boy, going back live after 4 weeks off, Judd, I need to be retrained. This is why Tom Horn doesn't like to give me vacation time. Forget everything I thought I knew about speaking or interviewing or talking on into a microphone. Anyway, Judd, thanks for hanging with us for a full hour, especially having to hold a phone to your ear for the whole time.
No worries.
You got a couple of new projects in the works, and I'm not sure which one you want to talk about or can talk about yet, as to which ones are. So far along that they can't be stopped now, God willing. But I know you're like me in that you don't let your brain sit still for very long. It's too many things to learn out there to just let it rest. What's coming up next for you other than the conference at the Fellowship in Lubbock, August 16th and 17th?
Well, I'm kind of like a kid in a candy store. I don't know. There's so much to choose from. I've been putting these projects off for years in some cases, but
now that you don't have to grade homework papers, it's a little more free time, huh?
Yeah. Boy, I tell you, I had a colleague of mine who said, well, I bet you won't miss grading. And I said, like you don't believe. I've got a number of things on tap. There are several books that I'll be able to finish this year that I've really basically only been able to pick at. One is the one that I've put out and I've pulled back a number of occasions, and that's the Nephilim dossier. The other one is the book on Giantology, which is essentially basically outlining the parameters. It's a discussion that you and I have had, and was really one that we had at the conference last year as well. Excited about actually getting the Nephilim dossier out in its final form, but also this book on Giantology, which is the subtitle is tentatively towards a science of biblical giantology. And another project that I'm really excited about, which I'm in the initial phases of, is a collaboration with an archaeologist and friend of mine, Dr. Aaron Judkins.
Oh, yeah.
He and I will be working on a book on the site of Gobekli Tepe in Turkey and its potential ramifications for the Bible. And when he asked me about it, again, I can't let too much out of the bag because we are in the initial phases, but this is a site that I've been lecturing about for close to 10 years. You can't, if you're interested in the world of the Watchers and the Giants, you can't help but become something of a prehistorian because of all the implications of the timeline that it deals with. Whether a person is a young Earth creationist or an old Earth creationist, you're dealing with prehistoric materials here. And for a site like Gobekli Tepe, which is conventionally dated to the to about 11,500 BC, this along with other sites like Chatal Hayuk in Turkey and also Tel Caramel in Syria and prehistoric Jericho. These are all late Pleistocene cities, essentially. They bear all the characteristics of basic characteristics of later civilizations, such as the ones that spring up in Mesopotamia and Egypt and Indus River Valley. And so if we're to judge those later civilizations by basic criteria for what exactly it means to be a civilization, in assessing these earlier sites, we have to at the end of the day, it comes to the same conclusion. These were civilizations long before we thought the first civilizations emerged. And in the case of Gobekli Tepe, you've got a very interesting geographical location. It's at the headwaters of the Euphrates River. It's about 15 or 20 miles from a town, actually, a modern town called Şanlıurfa, which may actually be a good candidate for Abraham's or his hometown, they call that of. And there have been a number of people that have written about potential Watcher and Nephilim connections to the site, not necessarily from a Christian perspective, biblical perspective, but Andrew Collins is one that comes to mind. But the trajectory that Dr. Judkins and I are taking is certainly different because we're interested in the biblical ramifications of this site. So that's one that's really got me excited as well. Aaron is a very capable field archaeologist. He's got a lot of experience in the field, and he's really a sharp guy.
Well, yeah, he's been a guest on this program a number of times, and seeing what you guys come up with regarding Gobekli Tepe and some of the other sites in southern Turkey is really fascinating because it's always seemed to me that there's more to the story than what I've been researching, but just because of lack of time, I've kind of limited my research for books like The Great Inception and Last Clash of the Titans to the work that's been done in Syria and Iraq and the Levant. So the stuff that the Hittiteologists or the Hurrianologists, if you will, or the prehistorians who are working in that area is always sort of on the fringe. I did touch on some of it in The Great Inception when I was looking at the practice of head shaping, cranial deformation, and because it seems that when you go and listeners, you understand that Judd and I are using the time frame generally agreed upon by secular archaeologists. Okay, this is not biblical timeline, but if you go back, say, prior to about 4000 BC, which is roughly speaking, prior to the emergence of the Ubaid culture, so almost you'd almost want to say pre-flood, if you were going to put a time, a pin in the timeline and say this is probably when the flood occurred, somewhere around here. Prior to that, it appears that almost every set of human remains that came out of what is now Iraq, Syria, even at Jericho, northwestern Iran, southern Turkey, as far as I know, and there haven't been an awful lot of papers done on this because I guess mainstream scholars consider this subject kind of woo, but it seemed like they all had deformed crania, cone heads, in other words, the kind of skulls that you and L.A. Marzulli were looking at down in Peru a few years ago. What have you found? I mean, in the research you've been doing at Gobekli Tepe and Çatalhöyük, what did the remains look like?
Well, you got a mix. I mean, the thing that always strikes me about this is that it's not necessarily that, as in the case with the skulls in Peru, it's not necessarily that you're looking at a Nephilim skull, but it's very clear that there's been intrusion into the human genome in some of the cases. There, at least there has to be. Now, some can be marked off by you could put them in the there are certain pathologies that can cause that. But in other cases, you've got the very purposeful reshaping of crania. Very often to mimic the ancestors. And the question that I came away with in my work in Peru was, well, I'm kind of interested in what these ancestors were and who they looked like, who these culture heroes and civilization founders and society founders were that they think they have to emulate. So that seems to be something that's at play in many of the places you find cranial deformation.
Right. The few papers that I found that I referenced in my book dealt mainly with the Near East, but it seemed to be the consensus of those who have looked at this subject that the ancient Near East was ground zero for the phenomenon, which is spread globally. You find it all over on practically every continent. I didn't get into the subject of of whether there was any sort of genetic component to this because there was no way to know. Most of the archaeologists working in the field prior to the last few years just sort of dismissed it, didn't really pay attention to it.
Right. It's either a non-issue. Well, and it's not only with the skulls themselves where they become a sort of academic non-issue, but there also seems to be an attempt to obfuscate these ancient sites in terms of their status as civilizations. I'm finishing up a paper right now, actually, on this topic that deals with, I reviewed 20-some-odd world history textbooks, and, these are fairly recent. They're over the last 5 years, and two of them reference sites like Gobekli Tepe and Natufi and Jericho. One gives a couple sentences, the other a paragraph, and the rest of them treat prehistory like a speed bump to Mesopotamia and Egypt.
Well, what is it about Gobekli Tepe that's so interesting to you?
Say again?
Well, what is it about Gobekli Tepe and that culture, that and Çatalhöyük in Turkey that makes them so interesting?
Well, as I tell my students, Gobekli Tepe is the paradigm that breaks the paradigm. For the longest time, sort of following in the wake of archaeologists like Vera Gordon Childs, we thought that agriculture was the basis, for basis for city-states and civilizations. That allowed the kind of sedentarism for villages to develop and specialization of labor. There's a kind of almost a mathematical procession. But at Gobekli Tepe, it seems to be that it's religion that becomes the basis for this sort of, not a habitation in the conventional sense, because the habitations are on the periphery, but it's definitely an analog would be like a Jerusalem or a Mecca, a holy city.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it's religion that brought these people together, and agriculture and the other things were the elements of civilization that fell in line. And so, that's why, I half-jokingly told my students for years that this is the paradigm that breaks the paradigm. You've got these other sites like Shatal Hayek and Natufi and Jericho and Tel Caramel that break the paradigm, and, here comes Gobekli Tepe. And it just, it shatters the other one. When you consider this in a biblical framework, and the possibility that there's water influence here, which a number of people have written about. I think Tom Horn has written a number of pieces sort of connecting the dots there, and I think he's on to something. But, you ask, why am I interested? What's there not to be interested about, is my retort. There are so many things about that site. One of the things that interests me, again, building on the topic of this paper that I'm working on, in the case of a Gobekli Tepe or a Natufi and Jericho or Shatal Hayek, there are certain elements, again, along the civilization question. You cannot outright deny, the status, the civilization status of these prehistoric city-states, because this isn't just woo-woo. Klaus Schmidt excavated at Gobekli Tepe for 25 years. So there are reports, hard quantitative archaeological data, however you choose to interpret that. But there are certain elements about it, the same goes for Shatal Hayek, and, my gosh, Kathleen Kenyon literally wrote the book on prehistoric and historic Jericho. I've stood on one of the big prehistoric watchtowers at Jericho. People can go there now and see them. So, this isn't just some antediluvian tribe, that the people are, it's not just a purview of the sort of conjectural speculation that you have on shows like Ancient Aliens. We're talking about, elements of very provable quantitative things, and it doesn't seem to be not just that it's not disseminated widely, but that it's also not being used to amend our perspective on the emergence of civilization and when civilizations emerge. I find that, as an academic and a teacher, I find that disturbing, but it also has ramifications for people with biblical worldviews. Why are they, why is there an attempt on the part of, these big corporate publishers, academic publishers to not use it? I mean, if history is supposed to operate along, a somewhat scientific paradigm, then the way that you do that is when evidence comes along that it either corroborates or disproves what was believed before. And so why are our textbooks not being amended appropriately? I find that troubling.
Dr. Judd Burton is our guest on A View from the Bunker. We're talking right now about Gobekli Tepe, which is one of the more fascinating prehistoric sites, but clearly a very complicated society that had enough of a power structure or ruling authority to build some really amazing things. What do you, again, you say it was a religion that brought people together. What do we know about the religion of the people who lived at Gobekli Tepe? And again, what time frame are we talking about?
Well, again, the time period we're looking at is I think the earliest conventional dating is 11,000 10,500 BC, the middle of the 11th millennium. So toward the end of the Pleistocene era. And we actually know a fair amount about the religion. It does seem to represent, and even people like scholars like Klaus Schmidt and others have concluded that the religion there does seem to represent this transition between the older animistic, totemistic religion and the more a belief in the more anthropomorphic gods. And so you do have lots of animal, bas relief carvings all over the place, representative of undoubtedly the totems that generations of them had believed in. But amidst them, you have these huge pillars that are anthropomorphic in form. They're humans. They're these large humans, again, deferring to Professor Schmidt's work there, even he seems to think that they began to worship these anthropomorphic deities. It's also interesting that Schmidt referred to this place as a gateway to the underworld. He said there was all kinds of iconography at the site, and even some of the openings and doorways in these huge circular constructions that represented passages into the underworld.
Really?
So it's very clear that just as you have these very, and not just in Gobekli Tepe, but at sites really all over the world at this time, you have these huge right-angle cultural transitions where people had been hunter-gatherers for millennia or millions of years, whatever timeline you subscribe to. And all of a sudden, they're growing huge plots of food and building these megalithic monuments.
Mm-hmm.
And at Gobekli Tepe, this very stark change in direction in terms of the religion, which, in my mind, speaks to an influence from the Watchers.
Okay.
That has yet to bear out, but that is my suspicion. And I think you find the imprint of that in a number of these other prehistoric sites.
That's intriguing. I'm really looking forward to this book when you and Aaron get that completed, because that general area, looking at a map, and mileage-wise, if you're going to walk it, it would take a long time. But compared to the scope of the entire planet, it's a relatively compact geographic area. And the research that I've done for Last Clash of the Titans, for example, and also went into the new book, Bad Moon Rising, about the older generation of gods, the first generation of anthropomorphic gods that we see in the Mesopotamian pantheon and then the Greek pantheon, the group that we would call the Titans among the Greeks. Enlil to the Sumerians, El to the Canaanites, Kumarbi to the Hittites and Hurrians, Dagon or Dagon to the Amorites along the Euphrates River. Same god by different names. Kronos to the Greeks, Saturn to the Romans. When you start tracing the myths back from the Greeks, you find older Hittite and Hurrian references to this god, Kumarbi, and the similarities in the myths of how they came to power by overthrowing the primordial sky god. Very similar, involving a castration myth. A different method of castration, but still castration. And then later they, in turn, were overthrown by the storm god in all of these different cultures. The Hurrians, the Hittites, the Greeks, the Romans, the Canaanites, the Amorites, etc. When you follow the myths about that character, Kronos, Saturn, Kumarbi, El, they all seem to originate in that same area around the northeast corner of the Mediterranean Sea.
Mm-hmm.
And, extended inland a bit, because Gobekli Tepe is inland quite a ways from the Gulf of Iskenderun. But when you extend that down, there's like a square. If you draw it out on southern Turkey and northern Syria, that seems to be where this character, king of the Titans or the leader of the Watchers, if you extend him back further in history to what happened on Mount Hermon. You get that general area. Basically, the Eastern Mediterranean seems to be the point of origin for these old gods.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, again, I think time will bear out that you're going to see a lot of influence from what happened. The events that transpired at Gobekli Tepe, because again, as I said, to my mind, it's such a right angle change in the cultural trajectory of the region. There are all kinds of interesting things. The site was backfilled about 2,200 years after it was initially put up. Does that speak to its time? Does that speak to its age before the flood? Was it actual backfilling by people, or was it a cataclysm that did it? Because we know that in this late Pleistocene, Younger Dryas era, all kinds of, which I think coincides with the flood of Noah, all kinds of weird things happening. Extensive flooding, just science fiction level solar activity, like vitrifying the rock on the surface of the earth in places, which we can verify archaeologically. It shows up in the sequence of the stratigraphy.
Mm-hmm.
So there are all kinds of interesting questions, I think.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, since I was going to say, since we know that God has sometimes used events like that to bring about his will, it makes you wonder if there was something going on there. It's like, okay, we need a solar flare here at these coordinates now to take care of it.
Yeah, certainly. Well, and we have a record of peoples, living in places like, Cappadocia that sought refuge underground. We had evidence of huge, extensive cities that in cases, probably did coincide with, this kind of solar activity.
Oh, wow. So what aspect of this are you and Aaron going to try to bring to light, if you can share that much?
Yes. That's my answer.
Okay.
as much as possible, and again, I can't let too many cats out of the bag because we are in the initial stages. But I think I've given you and listeners enough enough to tantalize them and get them to thinking about it, because I do think it's a relevant side, and I don't think that its emergence to prominence in the public eye, the timing of that is accidental either.
Should be fascinating. I mean, it seems to me that wherever the crew from Ancient Aliens has been, there needs to be somebody like you or us or Steve Quayle, Tim Alberino, to go or L.A. Marzulli to take another look and examine those sites from a Christian perspective, because something clearly was going on that has not been adequately explained in the standard histories, and it needs to be filtered through a biblical and a Christian lens. And there are still plenty of those sites in the Holy Land itself, Gilgal Rephaim being a great case in point. But I'm really another is the
I was just,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, to which I would respond, when do we leave?
October 12th of 2020. That's the mark your calendar. Next year's tour. The heat this year was a little much to take, but Gobekli Tepe, is that a place? I know it's southern Turkey, and it's not that far from where a lot of fighting was taking place over the last 5-6 years. Kobani and Jarablus, the Euphrates River just west of there, on the border between Turkey and Syria. There's some very heavy fighting. Is Gobekli Tepe a place where tourists can travel safely these days?
I think it just, you certainly can go there. It's a World Heritage Site, so in terms of the curation of the site, it's been bumped up a level. I think a lot of that just depends on heavy the fighting is, during this time of the year.
And it's far enough from the border that it may not spill over that far. You would think the government of Turkey would want to bring as much foreign currency, tourist dollars into the country as they could.
Right, and they do, yeah. So I think I know that in the past, at times there have been, I've had colleagues who said that they've traveled there and weren't able to go see it because of that. But again, I think it just depends on. It just depends on how heavy the fighting is at that time. I think now you can. I don't think, at least I haven't heard anything in the news lately that would make me think you couldn't. But yeah, in terms of its curation, they have all kinds of walkways there now, and there's a sun cover. There's a tent over most of the major part of the site.
Well, I'll tell you what, Sharon and I, as we're getting older, we're finding more of a taste to want to go and visit sites like this. So maybe that's something we can put together a visit to once we get done with the UK and Sardinia, Spain. A few other, there are quite a few other places. I don't see how anyone ever gets bored in this life. Judd, again, for people who are interested in this subject generally and getting some good scholarly information on the broad topic of Watchers, Nephilim, Rephaim in the Bible, the Sons of God, Giants of Old Conference, where do people go for information?
Well, you can go to Burton Beyond. There's a big banner link at the top. You can just click on that, and you'll find information on all the speakers and how to get to the fellowship church where it's being held, and ticket purchase. And there's also a link on the Institute of Biblical Anthropology website, which will take you to that page as well.
Okay.
Facebook. There's a Facebook page to keep up with goings on, and all kinds of places where people can interact through social media and check out some information on the site itself.
All right. BurtonBeyond.com. You'll see that link in the show notes at vftb.net or wherever else you find the podcast. Dr. Mike Heiser, Dr. Greg Hamp, Dr. Aaron Judkins, Dr. Judd Burton, and then two non-PhDs named Gilbert, Derek and Sharon. Honored to be a part of it, and we look forward to seeing you August 16th and 17th. Judd Burton, always a pleasure talking with you, and we look forward to seeing you face-to-face here in just a little under 2 months.
Yep, me too. My pleasure. Thank you, Derek.
All right, hang on the line. And you, listener at home, hang on as we go through the break. We're going to talk about a strange find in Edinburgh at Holyrood, which is a royal park. A pagan altar found buried under the sod, which then disappeared. That's straight ahead on A View from the Bunker.
The victims of the human trafficking and sex trade industry have reached a boiling point around the world. But here in the United States, the demand has never been higher. Tragically, the massive growth of these unconscionable underground organizations is due in part to many citizens' disbelief that our modern society is capable of such atrocities, and live in a denial that these crimes are taking place here on our soil each and every day. SkyWatchTV and Whispering Ponies Ranch remain committed to providing ministry to the hurting, to the victims of abuses just like this, and so much more. This is why we're proud to announce our new partnership with Yaku Buyans and 8 Days Ministry. In an effort to educate on these important topics and provide you with the tools needed to get engaged in the fight against sex trafficking, we present the 8 Days Special Collection. In this timely collection, you'll receive the cinematic movie inspired by actual events from director Yaku Buyans' 8 Days. This shocking presentation masterfully illustrates sequence by sequence how the victims of sex trafficking are often lured into entrapment, portrayed through the eyes of the lead characters. This incredible collection also includes the phenomenal book and companion workbook on disc, Woman of Influence, written by 8 Days screenwriter Philippa Bouyens and lead actress Katie Walker. This 30-day devotional and companion workbook on disc is an inspiring, deeply affirming, and educational set that will encourage women to walk in the true identity of influence and purpose bestowed on them as daughters of the Most High God. But that's not all. You'll also receive on DVD the never-before-released, uncensored, off-the-record interview with the team behind the 8 Days movie, featuring Yaku and Philippa Bouyens and actress Katie Walker as they disclose the hard-hitting realities of just how far the sex trafficking industry reaches, what the Trump administration has done to rescue thousands of victims, how the children of communities, including yours, may be at risk, and what you can do to fight back. Sold separately, this invaluable collection holds a retail value of $90. Yours now for your donation of only $35 plus shipping and handling. Sex trafficking is a difficult conversation, but ignoring it doesn't make it go away or help its victims. Understand this epidemic and learn how you can help by ordering the 8 Days Special Collection. Online now at the SkyWatchTV store or call 1-844-750-4985.
Shall we begin?
Let's begin now.
One man, one microphone, and a deep psychological need to tell the world what he thinks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Next Sunday night, we'll talk about elite soldiers sent into harm's way by a government that would deny their existence or their authority if they got caught. That is the basis of the book Expendable Elite, written by Lieutenant Colonel Dan Marvin, who has since gone home to be with the Lord. First heard of Dan, and that's our program next Sunday night, by the way, June 30th, here on A View from the Bunker. First heard of Dan in one of the History Channel's Men Who Killed Kennedy specials, because he claims that as a Special Forces soldier, he was approached by one of those guys from, no official agency or what have you within the government with a mission to carry out against an American citizen, and he refused the order. But he declined the mission, shall we say. But there's a lot more to that particular part of the story. But his book, Expendable Elite, and it was not about Kennedy, by the way, that he was being asked to kill. It was someone involved with the autopsy of President Kennedy. Well, it was an intriguing story. And then when I saw that he'd written the book, Expendable Elite, about how he and his Green Beret team were sent into Cambodia at a point when the American government declined that we were engaged in Cambodia at all, was really intriguing. He said he and his fellow soldiers really weren't worried about the enemy so much. They were afraid of the politicians back in Washington, D.C., who would send them out on these missions and then deny all knowledge, basically leave them hanging out to dry if they were to fall into the hands of the Viet Cong, who were launching raids against American soldiers from Cambodia, which is why Colonel Marvin and his team were sent over there. But anyway, it's an interview that I conducted with Colonel Marvin more than 10 years ago, I think back in 2006 already. And next Sunday evening, we'll have some family in visiting with us. So rather than take time away from the family to bring you the program, we're going to bring back an archived interview for you, because we've been doing this a while, and there are probably a few interviews that are in the can that you've not heard on this program before. So Lieutenant Colonel Dan Marvin, a good man, was honored to know him and to have a lot of communication with him back in 2006, 2007. Again, he has since gone home to be with the Lord, so he's up there with right now showing Richard Shaw the ropes. So that'll be the program next Sunday night here on A View from the Bunker. Story that came out this week that was sent to me by several alert viewers and readers, both of listeners, I should say. Readers, I guess, because you got to pay attention to see the story pop up in the news feed, but listeners to this program, but also watchers viewers of Skywatch TV. A story published in The Scotsman, which is a national newspaper in Scotland, of course, about a strange finding in Holyrood Park, which was turned up under a triangular-shaped cut in the sod that somebody stumbled onto last April just by chance. So the turf was pulled up to see, why did somebody cut this triangle shape into the turf, and found buried underneath this triangle were the remains of a concrete altar and a metal plaque with pagan imagery. I mean, overtly pagan imagery on it. I mean, you might actually say, because it's a pentagram with an image of the horned god, Hern, or Cernunnos perhaps, but Hern is the name that he goes by more commonly these days. And a woman in a, shall we say, pose of submission on this circular object. I'm trying to be as delicate about that as I can. In the middle of this pentagram. So you would understandably classify it as satanic, although the Scotsman's reporter asked a local pagan what he thought of it and said, no, that's pagan. That's not satanic. So anyway, you get this male figure with horns, the horned god, the green man, Hern, Cernunnos, whatever, and the female figure in a pose of surrender, shall we say, inside a pentagram, which is itself inside a circle. Along with this thing, which, and it's hard to get a sense of scale. I don't know how big around it is, but there was what's described by the Scotsman as a concrete altar with display objects found next to it, both of them buried underneath the topsoil. Well, park guardians at Holyrood Park called in specialists because they didn't know what to make of it. And again, this was found about a year ago. But then, according to a new report composed or written by a company called CFA Archaeology, both items had been removed. The pentagram with the horned god and the woman surrendering to him, and the altar with display objects, no description of what those objects were removed by what CFA Archaeology called persons unknown before they could investigate. Very, very odd. Again, president of the UK Pagan Council said the plaque was most likely pagan based on pictures of the triangle that he was shown. He said there were also a number of rune stones that were embedded in the concrete triangle around this metal plaque showing the horned deity. So again, a really odd thing. Concrete triangle sunk into the ground under a triangle-shaped chunk of turf was cut to bury this thing. The triangle around the circle, around the pentagram, which features the image of the horned god and a compliant woman. And again, the president of the UK Pagan Council saying, well, that's pagan, that's not satanic. Okay, according to Mark Black, this president of the UK Pagan Council, the two figures are the horned god and the goddess of water. The question, though, is, again, why this was sunk into the ground, apparently shortly before May of 2018. Shortly before May of 2018. Well, it would have been there in time for Walpurgisnacht anyway. Beltane. Holyrood Park, by the way, is, as we mentioned, a royal park in Scotland. It's administered by Historic Environment Scotland, which manages the park on behalf of the Queen. Spokesman for the group said, in 2018, our rangers discovered that ground in Holyrood Park had been disturbed with a metal plaque of a pentagram embedded in the earth. This item was subsequently removed, and according to the archaeologist specialist called in, removed by, quote, persons unknown, unquote. No mention in the story as to where this thing now is. This sounds like something Sharon would write in the Red Wing saga. Certainly something for the inner circle to investigate. So I forwarded a copy of that article to her. Been watching a television program here lately just so I could get a sense for what the programming is. And by that, I don't mean, the schedule of programs on or the type of programming offered by Netflix, but or Amazon Prime, rather. Just what message are they trying to send? And this is the program that Amazon has been promoting heavily for some months now called Good Omens. Streams on Amazon Prime. It's released like a lot of Netflix shows where they just dump the entire series at once so you can binge watch it if you want. Good Omens is based on, who was the author here? It's got a very Douglas Adams type feel. Stars Michael Sheen and David Tennant, best known as Dr. Number 10 in Doctor Who. Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, both successful novelists and have also written quite a bit for television. Terry Pratchett, I think known for the Discworld series? Sort of a Douglas Adams-ish sense of humor. And Neil Gaiman also likes to tackle religious themes. He's also got a show running right now on Starz, American Gods, based on his novel of that name. Anyway, the plot behind Good Omens is that an angel named Aziraphale and a demon named Crowley, interestingly enough, are working behind the scenes to try to avert Armageddon. They've found that they are, even though they're not alike, they like one another, they're friends, and they like life on Earth. And they don't want to see the Earth destroyed. And through a series of comic mix-ups, the boy who was destined to be the Antichrist is given to the wrong family, and so now they've got to find the 11-year-old boy so they can avert the apocalypse before it's too late. Well, of course, you can already tell if you're a Christian and listening to this program, you know that the theology of that is whacked. Sadly, Terry Pratchett, Neil Gaiman, treating the subject material like it's not really real, so there's no harm in writing a parody based on the book of Revelation and the last, like chapter 11 of Daniel and so forth, whatever. It's sad that because it's sad that it's such a good production. I mean, if I turn my brain off, I could watch it and enjoy it, but I can't because I'm watching it and saying, but okay, he's a fallen angel. That's not okay. You can't get around that. Sadly, a lot of people watching it are probably being entertained by it, and it's got a lot of big name actors in it. Besides Tennant, who again known for his probably the most popular of all of the actors who played the Doctor on Doctor Who during its 50-year run. Tom Baker is still my favorite, but still, David Tennant's right up there. Other big names that have just in fact, the last episode I watched just the other night, Brian Cox, very successful actor with a very long career, and Derek Jacobi, likewise. Both made appearances in Good Omens. Very disappointing that it's such a good. It would be a lot easier to just kind of dismiss this if it wasn't a good production, but it is very well done, sadly. And of course, the theology is really, really poor. As Christians, we don't look forward to Armageddon and the destruction of the world because there are many people who, sadly, just will not commit their lives to Jesus Christ before they run out of time. And that is nothing in which to take joy. But on the other hand, that is the plan that God has put into motion. And so we as Christians shouldn't view it with horror either. And that's kind of the message here that, it's something to be averted at all costs, even if it means for a loyal angel like the character in this series, Good Omens, defying the Creator. But, compared to some other things out there on television, I guess it's kind of lame, and so it's kind of flying underneath the radar. I just mentioned it because it features actors we like, and I was kind of hoping it would be poorly done, but it's not. It's actually well done artistically, but just spinning out some really bad theology. Now, there are some Christians who've taken notice of this, and that's kind of encouraging, except they mislaid the blame. A Christian group started circulating an online petition to compel Netflix to cancel Good Omens, to not make any more episodes of Good Omens. So the problem is that Netflix isn't producing the series, it's Amazon, and released through Amazon Prime. So when this Christian petition came to light asking the network to drop the program, delete it from its servers, quit offering it up to viewers, Netflix said, okay, we promise not to make any more. And Amazon Prime then joined in on the fun and said, okay, well, tell you what, we'll cancel Stranger Things if you'll cancel Good Omens. Because, of course, Stranger Things is a Netflix production. So, anyway, yeah, we're living in strange times when the Bible is openly mined for anti-Christian humor. I guess we shouldn't expect anything different. Jesus said if we treat him the way they did, that we shouldn't expect to be treated any better. So, but yeah, these are crazy times. I see that a young lady in Connecticut, a Connecticut high school student, has filed a complaint taking legal action because she failed to qualify for the state track championships in her event. Not because she didn't run well enough to get in, but because 2 of the slots in the top 6 were taken by boys who identify as girls. And so, because I guess the top 6 qualify and then go on to the state meet where athletes are viewed by college coaches or who then may offer scholarships to athletes that are, that they feel can help their college program. Now, this young lady will have to stay home while 2 boys who call themselves girls will be competing in the place of her and another young lady who would have made the trip instead. The problem is that in the world in which we live, or at least in the culture we live in here in the United States, actually speaking up and saying something qualifies you as a hater. And it's a shame. But at some point, this trend toward teaching children that their gender is fluid and they can be whatever they choose to be is going to crash on the rocks of this. Because women's athletics have tried for a long, long time here in the United States to get equal status or equal treatment from the government and from universities. And you've got female athletes who work really, really hard to perform their chosen sport to the best of their ability, who are now finding that mediocre male athletes are winning awards and beating them out for potential consideration for an athletic scholarship to go to college. So how are the social justice warriors going to then balance out those conflicting desires? In the age of #MeToo, how do you support and empower women while at the same time saying boys can be women and therefore we're empowering them, which just, in my mind, helps perpetuate the patriarchy? I mean, it is so ridiculous and devoid of any basis in science, much less common sense, that one hopes at some point people will wake up and snap back to reality and say, oh, wait a second. If you're a biological boy, you can call yourself whatever you want, but you still got to run against other biological boys. But sadly, as I say, doing that is gets you qualified as a hater. But what's even more disturbing is how the media, and this is a trend that has been continuing for the last couple of years now, it seems to be picking up steam, is this media trend to fawn over little boys who dress like fashion models. Another example just this week from a TV station in Austin, Texas, about a 9-year-old boy who, and I'm quoting from the article now, is spreading a message of love and inclusiveness as he performs as a drag queen. End quote. Seriously? Look, this is one of those issues which I struggle with the gentleness and respect. Not for the young boy, because frankly, all of us are confused when you're 8, 9, 10 years old. You don't know what you are. You're trying to figure out all through your teen years. That's a journey of trying to figure out who and what you are. Your parents are supposed to provide guidance and examples. So something is wrong there with his parents and or guardians. And I don't know his family status, so I can't speak to that. And I'm trying not to be hateful because this is a serious situation. He's not the only one. There are a number of these young boys. There was another one who performs under the name Desmond is Amazing, who's got a huge YouTube following. Parents are supposed to set an example and give guidance and love. And what we have here are examples of parents who are seeking attention by giving the media what it wants. And what the media wants are examples that they can show the world of the deconstruction of the roles that God created for the family. You read in the book of Genesis, and it's repeated by Jesus. In the beginning, created he them male and female. It is sad. And we just pray that this young boy gets appropriate guidance. Gender dysphoria is not funny. It is tragic. And just because these boys are dressing as drag queens doesn't mean they want to change gender. I'm not suggesting that. But there are some real issues here regarding gender roles, and it's clear that they're not getting proper or healthy direction. And then to put these young boys on television as examples of love and inclusiveness. The media is culpable in this, and frankly, it borders on pedophilia. Well, busy summer and fall ahead, and we are grateful and thankful for it. Coming up in, less than 2 months now. My gosh, it's only 5 weeks away. The first annual Defender Conference from SkyWatchTV. That's August 2nd through 4th. Now, we've been talking about this for quite a while. You know that it sold out very, very quickly. But with speakers like Mike Heiser, Pastor Carl Gallups, Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, Dr. Micah Lake, that's no surprise. Joel Richardson, and then all of us from SkyWatchTV. Me, Sharon, Josh Peck. Josh is co-author on his important book, Second Coming of the New Age. Stephen Bankars, Shelley Neese, author of the Copper Scroll Project, and much, much more. You can bring all of that to your home in HD video. Streaming video signups are now ongoing at defenderconference.com. $79 gets you all of those videos. You won't be charged until the weekend of the conference, and then you'll have access to all of them for 3 months after the conference. It is a deal. And you find out more and sign up at defenderconference.com. As we told you, the Sons of God Giants of Old Conference coming up 2 weeks after that, October 16th and 17th at the Fellowship. That's a church in Lubbock, Texas. Dr. Mike Heiser, Dr. Judd Burton, Sharon, me, Dr. Aaron Judkins, Dr. Doug Hamp, Dr. Greg Reed. I feel so inadequate. And admission, only $5. For more information, log on to burtonbeyond.com. The True Legends Conference, then, comes to Branson September 13th through the 15th. It's at the Mansion Theater. The theme this year, Answering the Alien Question. I will serve as the MC for speakers like L.A. Marzulli, Steve Quayle, Timothy Alberino, Richard Dolan, Dr. Hugo DeGarris, Chase Kletsky, George Knapp, and more. Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, just added the speakers lineup there. For information and to register, log on to gen6.com, GENSIX.com. October 4th through 6th, the Unsealed Scroll Prophecy Conference at the Grand Hyatt in San Antonio. L.A. Marzulli, Jonathan Kahn, Bill Salas, Carl Gallups, Ryan Pitterson, Jim Barfield, Paul McGuire, and more. Pastor Billy Crone, and music by John Schlitt. And then Sharon and I will be speaking as well. Log on to unsealedscroll.org, unsealedscroll.org, and use the promo code Gilbert20 to save 20%. And Gilbert20 will also get you 20% off at hearthewatchman.com. Their conference coming to the Hilton Irvine October 11th through 13th. More information at hearthewatchman.com. Remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.